hope you all got to talk to each other, make some new connections, talk a little bit of women's health. Very fun. My name is Nicole Althaus. I am a U.S. ambassador with the Global Health Connector, and I love our new term, collab action. Collab action. Say that fast. That doesn't work. Yeah, we'll get that. We'll get that. So I'm going to talk about innovation. If I can get my slides to go. Whoops. Sorry about that. I don't know what's going on with our slides. Huh? We're just going to give you a little view of what happened before. Yeah, this is great. Okay. There we are. We're back. Okay. But let's talk about, well, first of all, I'm going to just set up the slide, or set up the session. We're really excited. We're going to talk a little brief amount about innovation, and then I have wonderful panelists here today that are going to give you some great inspiration of maybe lessons learned and some things that are positive, so actually solutions. And so they will introduce themselves, but I'm just going to start out real quickly. Coming from the innovation and research world, more on the product and the go-to-market side, I'm really excited about today because it's great to see it in action. You can build a product or service to meet a need, but to scale it and to be able to go across borders is amazing to me. And that's why I love the Global Health Connector on the global vision and the global impact that they are making every day. So if we look at some of the facts, and some of them are from before, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but the fact that only 4% of global R&D is spent on women's health is pretty dismal, I think, at this point. I know we're all on a mission to make that better, but just the impact, the economic impact, and the impact on human life would be so much greater if we could get that to shift quite a bit. We talked about women are sicker 25% more of the time. They live longer, yet they live in compromised health. So we need to figure that out. So I'm not going to go into more detail on that, but I really think it's more important that we talk to our panelists. So I'm going to sit down because that's more fun, and I'm going to kick it off with Delali.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay? All right. So I'm Delali Attiogbe Attipoe. I'm the North America Executive Director for an organization, a nonprofit called Drugs for Neglected Diseases Initiative, or DNDi for short. We are an organization that is focused on how do we discover and develop and deliver treatments, particularly for patients within communities that are marginalized within neglected disease areas. Just quick background on myself. I came from private sector, was in private sector for about 20 plus years, and then joined DNDi about 2 years ago, really enchanted by the model that they have to be able to deliver in the last 20 plus years around 13 treatments in that short time frame. And coming from the pharma sector, coming from biotech, that's a remarkable feat to be able to deliver so many medications in a short period of time. One of the other things that was really critical for me joining DNDi is that I've personally witnessed and had a couple of the disease areas that are within the portfolio. And so recognizing and understanding that there really wasn't great treatments available for what I was dealing with on a personal level was also one of the critical attractions for DNDi. So, but really what I also want to highlight is why does DNDi actually even exist? There truly is a fatal imbalance when you think about medical innovation, and particularly within neglected disease areas. Less than 2% of all new drugs are for neglected disease areas. I really want that to really sink in. 1 in 5 people haven't even heard of the disease areas that are affecting the majority of the population worldwide. And typically they are diseases of poverty and associated with that, but that's such a huge burden. And one of the other things that must be also critically thought about is that women actually face a double neglect. And so you might say, well, why is that, Delali? Well, let me answer that, Nicole, because maybe you asked me. But when you think about the fact in terms of particularly women of childbearing potential, typically they are left out of clinical trials. And so we don't get the safety data, and therefore then leads to a number of restrictions and ultimately access to treatments for women of childbearing potential. And that is such a huge neglect that we have to be able to reckon with, especially when you think about the fact in terms of two issues. One issue being around the fact that 25% of the global population are women of reproductive age. So we cannot be eliminating and having the inability of women to participate in clinical trials. We need to be able to think about that. In addition, for neglected disease areas, we also have to think about the fact that within neglect and neglected disease areas, you already have limited treatments. So that's even another funnel that weeds out women who are dealing with neglected disease areas. And so how do we think about this as DNDi? And as DNDi, this is not something we want to have be the status quo. And so thinking about that, one of the things that we've done is partner to really think about innovation and how do we come up with treatments. How do we have this project where we've partnered with IDRC around improving gender-inclusive access for treatment of neglected disease areas? We're doing some project work in Brazil, Colombia, and Kenya around how do we think about this specifically within this area. Particularly, our project is focused on Chagas disease and leishmaniasis. I don't know how many in this room have heard of Chagas or leishmaniasis. Oh, we got literally, okay, we got a few people. This is good because for those of you who may or may not know, I mean, Chagas disease is predominantly, one of the areas where we operate is within Latin America, but it's recently also now endemic in the United States of America. There's been a lot of recent news around Chagas. For those not familiar, it's caused by a kissing bug that literally lands on you, defecates when it buries its hole. The parasites enter you, and about 30%, probably many years later, are unfortunately die from a fatal cardiovascular event. This is something that cannot stand. We really need to have more innovative new treatments to address. Leishmaniasis, there's various forms of leishmaniasis that follow and form up in multiple different ways. And so as DNDi, what we really want to make sure of is how do we ensure that other women can be a part of testing around new treatment, but we really want to understand the norms, cultural norms around the need, particularly in those two disease areas when it comes to the potential harm that could be caused to a fetus, and so leveraging contraception to be able to do so. And so with the support, as I mentioned, we really want to understand attitudes within this project of why some women don't want to or can't use contraception. And so for us, it's about doing a multi-study and being able to understand what those norms are and how can we have a much more inclusive way of designing solutions for patients who want to get involved in some of these studies. So we strongly believe that no woman should have to choose between treatment and their reproductive rights to be able to do so. And so this study is really going to give us a framework that not only is a qualitative look in terms of engaging around certain things that not just the patients, but their families, their communities, what are the sort of things that are barriers around contraception, but also having community-driven solutions to be able to come up with what's needed. And I invite you to be able to journey with us because no woman should be left behind in terms of research. Thank you.
Very nice, thank you. I neglected to mention, we also have Antonella online, and I'd love to have her introduce herself and share her insights. Share your screen? Oh, okay. Well, actually, let's just keep rolling, and we'll go with Zainab. Would you like to?
I'm available. Can you hear me?
Hear you.
Wonderful. So first of all, let me say thank you for this opportunity. Apologies if I can't be with you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Would you like to share your the screen with your slides?
I thought the slides were with you, but I can't pull them up.
You can just tell me when you'd like to change them. How about? Let's go.
Sure, sure. So very shortly, thanks a lot for having me from remote. I am in Switzerland. This is where our research, our policy work, and where our foundation has been created. We were first an association. We began our work in 2016, and last year we transformed into a foundation, the Women's Brain Foundation. A very short introduction about myself. I am one of the founder, the president, a medical doctor and neuroscientist who has been prioritizing the well-being of women in terms of brain health and mental health, and dedicated basically my life to this cause, which is coming from my heart. You can see here one sentence. It's about the strength of a people is measured by the well-being of its weakest member. And this is from the Swiss Constitution, actually, which means the Swiss Constitution entitled that you can really measure whether a country, a nation, a planet is doing fine by considering what about the status of the weakest within. Now, this doesn't mean that women are weak, not at all, but we also know that women have special needs as much as children. And so if we don't have them at the best of their health, it means the country, the planet, the community is not doing the way it should. And we just heard from the introduction that, women spend most of their life in poor health. It's about 9 years more than men will do. It's about chronic condition. It's about pain. It's about diseases that impact even women of being productive. So in the end, it's also the loss we have for our health, for our productivity, for our GDP. And we heard that it's about, return of investment. It was mentioned, the McKinsey report pointing at 1 trillion return of investment by doing research on women's. Actually, I want to add that our research done together with the McKinsey Institute of Health has been able to show that 1/4 of this 1 trillion goes specifically to brain and mental health of women. So the brain remains one of the most underserved, understudied organ of the entire human body. And we should go beyond fertility, beyond reproductive health, which is absolutely important, but we are not just that. We are a complex machinery per se, and we own women centuries of research that has not been serving the purpose of well-being of women around the globe. So that's what we do at the foundation. We generate the science. Next slides, please. Exactly. This is what I just mentioned to you. Out of this 1 trillion return of investment that the World Economic Forum, together with the McKinsey Institute of Health, has been able to show will be deriving by doing women's research and returning GDP by 2040 globally, we were able to show that 1/4 of this 1 trillion, it's about the brain of women. So diseases like depression, anxiety, Alzheimer's disease, migraine, multiple sclerosis, and the list can go on, unfortunately. It is about predominantly female. And there is one part that actually will make this 250 billion for the brain research in women even more compelling. It's the unpaid or underpaid work that women do worldwide as caregivers, which doesn't picture in any GDP in the appropriate way it should. So my challenge will be, what if women will strike basically worldwide and will show that the productivity of the entire planet will drop? Because if we don't do the caregiving, then I doubt the other can leave household and be as productive as they wish. It's a bit of a provocation, but we like to provoke the thinking of how to solve the problem. Because if we don't get thinking, if we don't use this machine by provoking a thought, then there is no result which can be tangible and change the world for better. This is a work that we published on Nature Mental Health, conducted together with the McKinsey Institute of Health, but I've mentioned that already. Next one, please. Finally, again, it's about our work with also awareness, and awareness comes by having sometimes slogan that make us reflect. And this is our launched campaign that generates that type of knowledge on people that even if they are from the healthcare system, they still remain surprised when they hear that majority of patients with Alzheimer's disease are women. Or when we say that majority of the patients with depression are women, with anxiety are women, with multiple sclerosis are women, with migraine are women. People say, really? Yes, it is like this. And women do not deserve this majority. That's the slogan of our campaign. Women should not be leaders in this regard. We deserve leadership roles, but not by being the majority of patients living with these conditions. So it's about prevention, it's about finding the right treatment, it's about prioritizing the need of women, and finally, rewriting medicine under the sex and gender lens. Next slides, please. So how do we do this? I believe in education. I mean, when we started in 2016, we were a small organization where a core of scientists basically came together and said, okay, let's change for the good of women. And we started to generate facts, data. When you bring data on the table, nobody can counteract because data speaks. So it's about showing the case for why we need to do that type of research, which is the business case behind it, but most importantly, which are the life behind it. It's about the life of women. And this goes along with education. We need to keep on educating on this high unmet need. And this is why we launched an academy. It's the Women's Brain Foundation Academy, where we invite people that share an interest in sex and gender precision medicine to unite and work together for generating the science, for educating the broader community, empower each of us as women, as scientists, as policymakers, as people working within corporation and being managers, as mothers, sisters, whatsoever, just with the knowledge needed to explain our need and to take care of our health. And finally, it's about connection, where women have to become much, much better than men. It's about connecting. And I say this every time I attend this type of meetings. I'm not in the room, unfortunately. I was attending an incredible event last week in Basel, exactly on the same topic. And I had a floor of 500 people. This was about 500 women. So my encouragement to hold the women in the room, and I hope that you are having also an equal presence of male, to hold by the hand a man and explain the matter, because we're not going to be the change maker ourselves alone. We are going to certainly lead it because it's our own interest and we will be leading this change, but we need to do it also with the contribution of the male counterpart to have the impact. So our academy, our educational activity, it's really aimed to create a broad platform where everyone comes together, makes the science, bring the evidence on the table, educate on the evidence, and finally make the change we need to witness. And with this, I'm done.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And the fact that you're tying in caregiving is innovative and thinking and very well needed. I'm going to pass it along to, sorry.
Zainab, Shinkafi-Bagudu. Thank you for the opportunity to be able to bring my perspective. I come from Nigeria, a country in West Africa with a population of about 230 million people, which makes it the largest Black nation on earth. I'm one of those children. I'll give you a little bit of my background and then talk about my work. I'm one of those children that was a little bit confused about what she was going to be and do and study. So I ended up dabbling here and there, and I think a little bit of that remains with me. When you were talking, it took me back to a time when I thought I was going to be an infectious disease physician. This is after I had become a doctor, and I actually did a master's in infectious diseases. But I ended up not going that way. I studied pediatrics. I specialized in pediatrics after my basic medicine in Nigeria. And then I went back home and started to interact with mothers. Mostly in our environment, children are brought to the hospital. As we've heard repeatedly, women are the caregivers. So when the children are ill, they come to the hospital and they see me, the pediatrician. But when I sit across, I'm not just child's doctor to the woman in the middle class parts of Nigeria where I was running my clinics. I am a woman, and any problem that they have, they could share with me. And slowly I discovered that there's a huge gap in women's health, particularly when it comes to their bodies. Yes, we all have malaria, we can treat malaria, but when there are more private things that a woman feels, she has a lump in her breast, she has a foul-smelling discharge, or her periods are not acting the way they're supposed to, they want to talk to another woman. And I started to be burdened with a lot of female issues. In particular, we were also running a diagnostic center, which is another story, but I won't go into that. We started a diagnostic center basically because there was a gap, and there were a lot of wrong results that were coming my way after I had practiced in a high-end country, high-income country like the United Kingdom, and I came back to Nigeria, and having clear blood results was a problem. So we started this diagnostic center, and we were able to sort of make things a bit better. One of the solutions that we offered there was a one-stop clinic for women. So they would have the mammograms. We would encourage them to check their breasts and have mammograms, and they find a lump. So they come back to me and say, okay, downstairs I saw that you have a mammogram, and I went and I checked and I have a lump. So that's how I started getting pulled into oncology, cancer, and advocacy in that space. Women were not as educated, they were not aware, they were not able to make decisions, they were not able to access care when it comes to symptoms, the common symptoms and signs of cancer in my environment, the commonest of which was a breast lump, the precursor of breast cancer. Breast cancer remains the commonest cancer in my country. On paper, we're supposed to have about 23,000 women every year, out of which 2/3 die, and they are diagnosed in late stages. So again, gradually, I started being drawn into that world, and that became the career that I have built in the last 20 years. We started the foundation, and the foundation was supporting women with awareness, with screening, and with access to treatment, fundraising. And again, it wasn't enough. So we had to start working with government to improve policies, to work at a higher level, to try to ensure that we have more women-friendly solutions in the government and access to care for these women. Again, that wasn't enough. You go to the government. At one part of my life, I was part of the government. My husband was the governor of one of the states, in the northwest part of Nigeria. And that really opened my eyes to the conflicting issues and the real demand that the government faces. And it's not just enough for us to keep on expecting the government to do this. There's a huge, huge responsibility on government. We have a federation of 36 states, and each state has its own law. But the federal government has their own law, and then the states, it's filtered down to the states, but most of the time they're not able to implement it. We have policies, we have new vaccines coming into the country, but there is no backing research on how we're going to implement and distribute those vaccines. How do we diagnose the women that are probably, they have high risk for cervical cancer when we do not have enough of the machines in the country or within access for the women? So really, that's a lot of what I do now. I work with the Coordinating Minister of Health, Professor Mohammed Pate, as a senior advisor on women's health and cancer advocacy. I also sit on the board of the Union for International Cancer Control, where I was elected the president-elect last year. And this is one of the global bodies that is really keen on translating global initiatives into national action. And through these various platforms, I hope to make a change in women's health, in particular as it has to do with cancer, breast and cervical, which are the two highest occurring ones in my end of the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Zainab. As a breast cancer survivor, I thank you for your service. Zina, would you like to take it away?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. What an incredible panel here. I'm really honored to be here and be invited to this event. So when I was 3 years old, essentially start of my life, I was impacted by a serious geopolitical situation. My family woke up one morning in Uganda, in East Africa, and we were told we had to leave the country within 90 days. Life and death situation, nothing you could control. So that actually taught me several years later about, okay, innovation. You can't be picky about where you're going to go, but this is a problem that must be solved. And so no is not an option. You got to find a way forward, right? And I was honored to be speaking here today as part of an UNGA event because it was because of the UN and public-private partnerships involved that actually is why I'm alive today and here in this country. And so my background is in pharmacy. I'm PharmD as well as a master's in clinical pharmacy. I spent my career in corporate and regulatory affairs and in global regulatory affairs, so just the topic we're talking about, translating innovation across borders is a big factor of that. And I spent about 24 years in corporate at large companies, and also partnering with startups as part of that role. And so really knowing firsthand what the importance is of startups and actually the ecosystem that's involved in getting products to market. And then I spent time at a startup itself and leading, having a leadership position at that startup. And then last year, I founded my own company, Innopathwayz, IPZ for short. And I started a podcast this year called Ipso Facto. Innovation, no way but forward. And what I've learned over the years and why I have started my own area of giving back, which is consulting, advisory, advocacy, is because with my experience, it is important to contribute back and enabling good health and so individuals can live well. But there are several gaps that are involved with that need attention. And so one of those areas is also advocacy. And I was honored to be joining the Women's Health Advocates as a steering team member this year, and also advocating on the Hill in terms of Alzheimer's and other areas of health. Now, when it comes to getting products across borders from an industry perspective, you have to take, again, like I said, the ecosystem in mind. So it's not just about you're sitting in a company, you've got data, and how do I bring this product to market, make money? You really need to think about what is the purpose of your innovation, right? What is the problem that you're trying to solve, and is it really needed in the country that you're bringing it forward? So you have to consider the standard of care, and the standard of care is not always the same. So in one particular case, we had this situation where supply chain suddenly tells me, oh, we're closing this site in this particular country, and I'm genericizing this on purpose. And no discussion of it. First time I'm hearing about it, even though I'm on a leadership team heading up regulatory affairs. I'm sorry, you can't do that, I say. So nonetheless, there are business reasons that were made and were already made. So I had to collaborate and find a solution. So we did find a solution. We kept the manufacturing site in country, but at a different manufacturing site. So why was this important? Is because when you look at regulatory affairs pathways, many countries will accept some harmonization procedures or regional procedures. And your country of origin, the basis of your clinical studies where they're conducted, the comparators that you're using, which is also involves the standard of care, all of that comes into play. And often many countries that are receiving the product from the country of origin, the receiving countries want to have some trustworthiness and assurance that in the country from which this product is coming from, that the product is also marketed in that country, right? So you really have to take some very strategic decisions on what your country of manufacture is, and also your entire supply chain. It's drug substance coming from here, and et cetera, et cetera. Also keeping this in mind, I have worked on diagnostics and digital as well, and also other areas of emerging innovation. So this is often missed. So this is something that's extremely important, that when you are considering a global pathway, you have to take into account local country needs. You have to also take into account, when you're deciding what studies that you're doing, that you have what you've heard many people allude to and talk about specifically, is that patient experience. You have to have that patient experience first and foremost up front, so that you know that the innovations you're bringing forward can actually be implemented in the country in which you're bringing it forward. Otherwise, it might not, actually, honestly, might not be usable or might not fit the ecosystem. So that also means you have to have partnerships with global government affairs policy, regulatory affairs, supply chain, science, all across the board. So it is the science, it is the patient first, but how you bring it all together and make sure what you're making can actually be used is extremely important. So at the end of the day, we did maintain the registrations, because otherwise we were going to lose everything by taking the manufacturing site outside of the country, and that actually saved a lot of money as well, because going forward we were able to use those registrations as a basis for follow-on innovations.
Thank you. So, in the interest of time, because I'd love to be able to open it up for questions, I'm just going to ask one question of all of you, and then I have one at the very end. So we'll get to you in just a moment, but I'm going to go across the board. And actually, I'm going to go online first. Antonella. So what is one innovation in women's health research that has the fastest global impact? Now, this can be something that's outside of your purview of what you're fighting for, but what is an example of how you would like what you're fighting for, what your passion is for, and how could you implement that to get the innovation to go across borders?
I think that as old as mankind is, the innovation goes along with education. So if we want to innovate, we need to educate to the unmet need, multiple stakeholders, including investors, and make them understand that it's not just about the return of investment, but also the unmet medical need and how the planet can benefit in the way forward. I think that if we want to innovate, we have to also come up with some regulatory pathways that speed up innovation in this specific field, whether we should be inspired by how it was done for orphan diseases, or if there is additional ways. I'm confident that regulators from around the world are currently sitting together to reflect on how to speed up innovation in this field. So to just come to a conclusion, I think innovation, it's about empowering people with knowledge and with education, make them reflect on what needs to be done, and then ideas will be generated within laboratories by those scientists that come from those underserved and underrepresented communities. So if we want to innovate for a given geography, I think that we have to empower local scientists, local thinkers, to understand how to come up for a solution for their people, and then, of course, broaden up to a global audience. I think that we do often the opposite. I live in Europe, and how research works in Europe is that we have great innovation, which but serves always Europeans at the end. We first enter the US market for good reason, And we know which are those reasons, of course. The market is bigger, there are higher margin of return for investors, absolutely fine. But, leave people behind. So we should try to harmonize access to innovations around the globe to have, unmet needs prioritized and give incentive for both developers, both investors, as well as regulatory paths that facilitate the access of this innovation on the market.
I'm going to go to you, Delali.
So in terms of the question, so your same question?
Yes.
Okay. And so if the question is around, how do we accelerate on innovation, correct? So just in terms of...
Is there an innovation example or something, an innovation that's going on right now that you would like to replicate with what you're trying to do? Antonella talked about getting the word out, and that's part of what you do as well.
Yeah. So I was actually going to capitalize on some of what Dr. Antonella discussed. So again, in terms of really being able, I think there's a dual approach in terms of innovation. From the innovator side, and certainly as an organization like DNDi, one of the pieces that we really critically tried to think about from the beginning of early discovery all the way through implementation from the product side is how do we integrate the patient voice along the way? And oftentimes, you can lose that aspect of the patient voice. And so you really have to almost in some ways integrate and work backwards. Be able to ensure that you're really being able to capture, well, what are the concerns within the community? How do you be able to build out from each and every step what your target product profile is, but with the voice of the community in there? When you are getting to a place where there's an opportunity to do clinical trials, what is it in terms of the needs, the setup, the local regulatory bodies, as already mentioned a little bit earlier, because one of the challenges that, in terms of putting on the local context, one of the challenges that we found in being able to actually execute and do some of the studies that I mentioned a little bit earlier was understanding the ethics committees and what was actually also needed at that regulatory level with the institutions we were partnering with. So partnership becomes very critical to understand very much within the local level and context, and what are some things that unexpected that you might not anticipate. So in terms of really being able to flesh that out and bring the community along in the journey pathway to innovation, I think that's where you'll have much greater success in what we've been able to see as DNDi.
Nice, thank you. Zainab.
Yeah, again, Antoinette said most of the things that sitting in my chair from an LMIC point of view. If we think about innovation, a lot of the innovations come from research. Research is not inclusive of many low middle income countries as well as women. So when the solutions come, they're Eurocentric, as she rightly said. What I would like to see is more involvement of all the countries, regardless of their geographical location. Our data tends to be quite weak, but we can be supported to improve on that. So if we can work more with the local players, the scientists, the researchers, even the policymakers, the lawmakers, so that we can build a stronger system. And the system doesn't just mean the health system. Education and awareness is really a critical part of how we start to deliver solutions to low middle income countries. The HPV vaccine, I can answer the question by saying, oh yes, I want to see more HPV vaccine and the ROI that it has and the lives that it will save. But we create the vaccine, we deliver it to different countries of the world, including the LMICs, but we don't put as much effort into how we're going to implement it. We don't stop to think that in my country, Nigeria, there are over 7 million girls that are out of school, and we deliver a vaccine that is based on distribution through a school system. Automatically, 50% of the girls are excluded. So we need to contextualize our innovations and make sure that all the geographical areas of the world are more inclusive.
Thank you.
So lot of great advice and statements. I agree with all of that. I think I'll just take one other angle to it. Regulatory pathway was already mentioned, of course, and that's front and center, I think. I would say slow down to go fast. I think that's critical. What I've seen on a lot of innovation projects that will come, the emphasis is on speed and let's get it out quick. Now, obviously, for some great reasons, it's because patients are suffering, and we want to get the innovation out there so that people can actually benefit from that. However, speed sometimes is not your friend in that case. So I say slow down to go fast because, first of all, do you have the right patient experience that is part of the clinical data and supportive data? Are there additional studies you can do that would augment and complement the research that maybe you already have or it's already in plan regarding the patient experience? Because this is extremely important. And I think with those, from an advocacy point, what I've learned just recently this summer is that when it comes to speaking with regulators, when it comes to speaking with policymakers, they may buy into research data and all of that, but they might not feel it as compellingly. You gotta have that story that speaks about that patient experience. Oh, this product won't be available, diagnostic won't be available. It often doesn't hit you in the heart if you have a real patient experience. This person died because they didn't get access quickly enough. This person is suffering needlessly because they don't have the proper diagnostic to actually get them on the therapeutic that is actually specific for them. So I think all in all, that can also add to accelerating the pathway in your conversations with regulators across the globe, and also getting together some harmonized pathways in an accelerated way, much more meaningfully, and get the ecosystem you need to get it out there.
Great, thank you. Okay, so could we get a couple of questions, real brief questions if possible, to state your name and your question, and we will get it answered. And they're coming around with the microphone.
So my name is Dr. Kadzarechta, and I'm working as expert advisor and evaluator for European Commission. I'm specialized in healthcare innovation and also mentor and evaluator in Women Tech EU call, as well as advisor for a couple of startups, especially focused on women's health. So my question would be actually, and the esteemed panel addressed a lot of topics really in an excellent way, but how can we bring a real impact? There is a huge disconnection between what actually women need around the world, especially in these underserved areas, and women founders who are maybe sometimes having amazing ideas for fantastic technology, a new innovation in breast cancer detection, which was the topic of my PhD, and I'm very, very much passionate about that. But also other topics when it comes to pregnancy, when it comes to brain health. So how can we bring these kind of areas together? Women who are really needing the innovation, so more of the, let's say, patient advocacy part in here, but also women who are at the forefront of technology, who really want to do something to bring the impact and change the world of that. Thank you so much.
I think anyone could answer that, but I'll hand it to you, Delali.
No, I mean, excellent question. And one of the ways that we've tried to address this, probably I'll use the example of the case study that I just touched on briefly, because we very much work within underserved communities, and one of the pieces that we want to be able to integrate is the community voice. And so we work with a number of local community advisory boards so that we're ensuring that we're bringing the patient voice in. And so in terms of you, as an innovator, you have to be working on the ground. You cannot try to do things remotely from one area and think that you're actually integrating the voice of the patient. we found it very critical to have boots on ground, to be able to not just execute in terms of, for instance, the surveys that we wanted to be able to do, get the quantitative information, and then the qualitative, because you have to be able to do follow-up. Sometimes you don't have the right contact information, and sometimes people don't want to come back. How are you going to re-engage? You can't do that from a distance. And so the ways that you're going to be able to continue to ensure engagement is really around how are your local advocates, your community board members, your advocates around the room who are championing with you at the local level to be able to ensure that you have that coming through. And this goes without saying, I mean, I think we've all said it, many in this room already know it. You have to, how then do you translate? It's not just about translating preclinical in my world to innovative treatments, but also how are you translating your policy, your guidelines into practice, right? And that's gonna come through that advocacy component. Advocacy, advocacy, advocacy from beginning to end.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just add to that something I heard from the women's health advocates over the summer, is that part of regulatory government agency, why not include women's health experts as part of the regulatory reviewing body, right? So such that there are experts in oncology or other areas that are in the regulatory framework of the FDA, for example. We know that science is emerging even more on women's health. There's so much that we still do not fully understand, but there's so much more that we could know. So why not have women's health experts as part of those reviewing body, so that you're not always re-explaining the science, the basic science of women's health. It's already known. It's also already known within that regulatory body what all women's health innovations are coming across, so that there can be kind of a comparative analysis or a much more thoughtful conversation with sponsors on how that innovation can be made better, as well as the data that goes along with it.
Antonella, did you want to add to that?
Yes, I'd like to make a comment, and thank you for mentioning the regulatory path. I worked as a regulator for 4 years. I was working for the Swiss Agency for Therapeutic Products Approval. I applaud the agency in Switzerland that exactly did what Zina suggested, appointing an expert on women's health in the gremium of those who will decide whether a drug is safe or whether a drug is working also on women. But nevertheless, there is one major aspect that has to be taken into account. I mean, regulators can be educated because there is a scientific advice that can be asked timely to consult with them. Nevertheless, you know, it's an opportunity to educate not only the drug developer, meaning, or the innovator developer, but also the other way around. We have to educate regulators as well, because they are colleagues like us. They don't sit into innovation. We do the innovation. So the scientific advice, usually it's a mutual exchange to educate both parties. But the main problem remains. I give you two examples. One comes from our own research that has just been published on Alzheimer's disease. And I think that this is a problem that it's independent of the geography. Our patient surveys conducted on Alzheimer's, people living with Alzheimer's disease or their caregivers, the beginning of the disease. So let's say mild cognitive impairment, showed that women access specialized care less than a man will do. And surprisingly, women knew less about Alzheimer's disease than a man will know, which again goes back to the fact that women have in general less education on disease and opportunities, but also that there is an intrinsic bias in how science and medicine is done. Doctors are biased, researchers are biased, our data are biased, whether we like it or not. I give you the other part of the example. A publication on Cell published last year, September 2024, big headline, metformin, which is a drug we all know for treating diabetes, can reduce neurodegeneration into monkeys. Now, that's a great news, reduce neurodegeneration of 7 years. This is a breaking news, in my opinion, because, you know, it shows that metformin can do quite a lot on the animal model, which was monkeys. But what if I tell you that about those 20 monkeys, not even one female monkey was included? So the problem starts at day zero in the lab. So we can do as much as awareness we want among policymakers and regulators, and actually a lot is done finally, but the major unsolved problem is to think from day zero to all the startups, actually to all the investors. When an investor meets a startup, the first question should be, is it good for both men and women? Is it good for all ethnicity in the world? Because there is also the other big elephant in the room, which is ethnicity, which is not at all addressed in clinical development and novel technology development right now. And with this, I'm done.
Great, thank you. Any other questions?
Let's see, there we go. Delali, hi, I'm nice to see you at this point. I'm Andrea Lucard. I'm one of Antonella's advisors, but I was 15 years at MMV. So Medicines for Malaria Venture is a sister organization to DNDi, and one of the ways that my own pathway of getting involved in women's health was that when you're dealing with malaria medicines, the people who die first from malaria are children under the age of 5. The second group of people who die are pregnant women. And it's usually first pregnancy pregnant women, which is to say pregnant girls. We're talking about people the ages 11 through 15, say 17. And in the diseases of poverty space, we had the same kind of response, which was to say it's just too difficult. We can't do it ethically. We can't manage it, and so forth. And nevertheless, because we were a publicly funded foundation, that work began to happen. And Delali, I would specifically like you to address the possibility that work that's happening in the neglected disease space and the diseases of poverty actually has implications coming backwards into the more developed countries, both in regulatory and the potential for regulatory organizations to really come forward, and how we can learn backwards as opposed to saying it's all coming from the north to the south. How about the other way around? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, and it's a very, very interesting question. And actually, you probably could also speak to some of this as well, too. But one of the pieces, and this kind of gets a little bit to what I was touching a little bit earlier on around Chagas disease in particular being endemic within the United States. But whereas a lot of the research experience, we do have a number of experts who are within the region here, but a number of experts who are been working within other areas where it's been largely endemic for some time. And so one of the pieces that I think is we're probably can pick up from, this kind of goes back to the regulatory piece, is how do you kind of partner to be able to build up that expertise in a way that you're working with the regulators much earlier in the process so that you can bring certain things to market faster. So DNDi has worked, for instance, usually through like with the WHO and other regulators to be able to disseminate information at the local level, working with local regulators to bring some of these medications from an access perspective faster. And so that's one of the areas where it's sometimes when we're talking about whether it's oncology medications or other NCDs that DNDi doesn't work on, but given whether you're working with the FDA or other areas, it can be a little bit slower in the process depending on whether or not that process has other collaborators with it. But because you're kind of forced with limited resources to work with a large number of collaborators, you have to work at an accelerated, faster pace to be able to bring innovation faster. DNDi works from a principle and working with MMV in the past. How do you look at areas of open science and being able to utilize data in an open fashion? And so that's one of the areas where I think because we've been able to accelerate with bringing treatments faster, whether you're talking about repurposed or new chemical entities, but you can't do that by yourself. We have a partnership model where we're working with not just the regulator, we're working with academia, we're working with private sector, in pharma, we're working with as number of many people as we can in a way that allows for open science and open data sharing so that we can come and bring products faster together. And I think sometimes having come and worked in private sector, sometimes people can get very narrow in their innovation and wanting to be able to kind of in some way shield their data. But I think there's opportunities that we can still talk about IP and be innovative in IP, but still be able to accelerate in a faster way and in a meaningful way through partnership to getting the innovation that we want to see faster and that product faster when we collaborate and share our data more openly.
Zainab, did you want to share your thoughts, Rule? No? Okay, you got it. Okay. One more question?
We had an online question, okay,
Oh.
which was for somebody from SWHR. So that obviously that's going to have to take place in the open session. But the question, just for the audience for a second, was whether the Society for Women's Health Research would effectively endorse innovation. So we'll come back to that. But one of the things I would say is that health AI that I referenced first in the morning, one of the things that it's doing is it's actually publishing a list of health AI solutions that have been approved by ministries of health in various countries around the world. And I'm only raising that because so many of the possible solutions in the future are going to be based on some form of AI, even if it's AI cleaning data, filling gaps. That's an interesting development to watch as countries start to actually effectively curate some of the solutions, and obviously if you think about the pandemic and COVID, one of the concerns was, well, who's the trusted source of information that was coming out of people like Google? So this whole idea of who curates approved innovation is going to be an important area, I feel. But we'll come back to that in the open discussion.
Great. We have 1 minute.
Yeah, hi. My name is Shubha. I work with an organization called Sati in India. We work on infectious diseases. This question is for the expert from Nigeria. In your capacity as an advisor to the government, were you able to influence the government to expand the package of services right now beyond RCH? And if so, how you did it? And if you can also explain the research framework or research infrastructure in Nigeria, because we are talking about including listening to women, including their voices, and including LMIC population in research. If you can talk about what you're doing at Nigeria and also your ideas on how we can be included as a part of research at the international level. Thank you.
Okay, so with regards to convincing the government to widen the scope and to be more inclusive, it's an ongoing process. I cannot sit here and take the credit and say, yes, I've been able to do this and do that, but there are steps. Every year you find new steps. Every budget, there's more budgetary allocation for women's health. There's a lot going on both within country and outside from partners and all the global funders, with especially regarding maternal health right now in Nigeria, due to the very high rate of maternal mortality that the country has. So there's a lot of focus on that now, and we do advocate. All the work starts from advocacy, whether you're doing it in-country or outside, at a local to the government. We have to be advocates in our own way and showcase the problems that women have. And a way, how can we be more inclusive, which might answer my own perspective of the last question a bit, is there are structures that guide the innovation and research processes that go on in country, but most of it goes institution to institution. So if somebody from MSK wants to run here in New York, wants to run a research on cervical cancer, they would go to an institution, a tertiary institution in Nigeria, get all the approvals that they need from the regulatory agencies and carry out their research. But what we can do better is to provide very clear terms that the funding should include LMICs more. When we're carrying out researches on innovations here in the global north, then we should stipulate that a certain percentage of marginalized populations, racial minorities, and so on should be included, not just LMICs. So those are ways, and for those who want to be more inclusive or more involved, then my suggestion would be your first port of call should be to tertiary institutions, the regulatory bodies that control that. They exist and can be quite helpful as well.
Thank you, everyone. That was wonderful. We had some great themes here, and we need another open session, but unfortunately, everybody else, we have a lot for you today. So please give a hand to our wonderful experts here and online. We learned a lot about innovation, and thank you so much.